Sadie and Liz, how was your morning this morning?
So far, so good.
So far, so good. Perfect. Perfect. So we have a series of questions. We're just going to lay them on you. We're going to grill you. No, I'm just kidding. It's going to be a lot more casual. What we'll do is we'll probably ask a question. And, since there's only two of us, I assume that it'll be pretty easy in terms of, I'm not going to ask a specific one of you the questions. I'll ask it. And then whoever wants to jump in first can jump in first. And it can be kind of more like a casual conversation. So, first question, what was your biggest triumph as you assumed your executive leadership role?
I can go first. I have slightly more time in my role than Sadie, but not by much. So I actually have only been in my role for about a year and a half now. I think for me, the biggest triumph in the time that I've been with the ARC Fond du Lac really has been changing our relationship with the community. Organizationally, we've been a part of Fond du Lac for more than 50 years. We're actually coming up on 60 years already. And for me, being able to raise our profile to get more folks involved in the work that we're doing with folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities, and really just making sure that folks see us as a partner in the community and a collaborator in the community has been a huge triumph in a fairly short period of time. And I think being able to do that in a variety of means, whether that's, my engagement or my presence at events, but also, just having some really simple conversations that have led to incredible collaborations. That's been an amazing achievement in a fairly short period of time.
Thank you so much. Sadie, do you have anything to add?
Sure. Well, right. I started this role on April 20th. So probably the newest champion in my role. And honestly, even before I started April 20th, the weekend before, I had started to get calls from people, the DA of the county and the city administrator or city manager, saying, I know you start on Monday, and what's the plan with reopening Fond du Lac County? That right before I had started, that's when Governor Evers had issued an extension of the Safer at Home order, and our businesses were really unsure, and police were unsure, and the community itself was just unsure of what this meant. And so even before I had started my role, I started conversations about this Reopen Fond du Lac County task force and got that set up. I came in, I think, at like 6:30 in the morning on my first Monday, and my first three calls were County Executive Alan Beekle, City Manager Joe Moore, and the DA Eric Toney. And then we started assembling the task force. And the task force is still meeting every other week. We took a little break in summer, but we are so proud of what the task force has accomplished with materials for our businesses, a pandemic operations plan, a daily COVID email, and just having people from throughout all of Fond du Lac County hearing what's happening and sharing what's happening has been huge for Envision Greater Fond du Lac. We've gotten a lot of compliments on the task force and the information that we've been able to deliver to people.
Talk about being thrown in the fire.
Right?
I've gotten many comments about how we were very much more prepared than some of our neighbor cities. So kudos to that effort. Obviously, we kind of read off your cookie cutter resume, where you went to school, what you do, but tell us a little bit more about yourselves. I mean, what you like to do, maybe a fun fact about you, maybe some past employment experience. But yeah, tell us a little bit more about you.
Liz, you want to go first?
Apparently. Sure. So a little bit more about me. So I am from Oshkosh originally, and I like to point that out because I have purposely chosen Fond du Lac. It was a very intentional choice to build my life and my home in Fond du Lac when I moved back to the area about 6 years ago now at this point. What do I like to do? I like to bake. I like being outside. I have perhaps unknown passion for motor racing. So I spent a lot of my summer out in Elkhart Lake at Road America, and a fair portion of the rest of my time trying not to get speeding tickets in Fond du Lac or the surrounding areas. Fun fact about me, some folks know this, some folks don't, but it's a huge part of how I approach my work and how, as I like to say, I was raised professionally. So my first position out of graduate school was working in student housing. So I ran a residence hall or a dorm, but I worked at the University of Hawaii. I was there for 3 years, and really that culture, that approach, how we handled collaboration, just the way we engaged not only with the folks around us, but with a host culture and other cultures, and the way we looked at how we interacted with folks really shaped how I approached my work. And that's something I've carried with me all the way through. And I think my staff at the ARC still occasionally hear a little bit of Hawaiian pidgin slip out if I'm, really excited about telling a story. So occasionally I'm still explaining the not usual words that come out of my mouth.
As Liz was talking, I'm trying to think about something that's exciting or unique about me. I don't know. I lived in Scotland in college. I did a semester in Stirling and traveled all around the UK and Amsterdam. I've traveled a lot in my life. Throughout Germany, Luxembourg, and a lot of Mexico, not so much Canada, so someday Canada. But love to travel. Obviously, COVID has put a damper on a lot of that travel, but hopefully in the future. And my background, I kind of joke, I was enrolled to be pre-law. So I was economics and pre-law, and my goal was law school. And my goal was to live in Chicago or New York because I wanted to get out of a small town. I grew up in the Holy Land, which is not Jerusalem, and went to La Crosse for my undergrad and thought that I was going to go work in Chicago for a while and then go to law school down there. And when I was thinking about an internship, my aunt had said, if you're going to be a lawyer, you should know how laws are made. So go and intern with your congressman, who I had no clue who that was. It was Tom Petri, who was in Congress since 1979. So he had been there a long time, never heard of him, didn't know anything about politics. And when I had my interview with the Petri office to become an intern, and they asked me about my politics and all of that jazz, I had said, I really see some great things coming out of Hillary Clinton. And the irony of saying that for those who are on the call who maybe don't know, Tom Petri is a lifelong Republican, and obviously a Republican office. When you intern in a congressional office, it's nonpartisan. However, they would have probably liked to have heard something more along the lines of, I knew something about politics, but I knew nothing. And I am still so grateful that they took a chance on me, knowing absolutely nothing about government or politics, because that's where I've spent the last 12 years of my life, was in political campaigns and federal government. So take a chance.
That is quite the story about your obsession with Hillary Clinton 12 years ago. So this is a question that we had from one of the attendees. What is the best piece of advice you can give to other women starting out in their professional careers?
I love that question. I can go first if you want, Liz.
Yes, by all means.
I know it sounds really cliche, but Lean In, which is also a great book, by the way, by Sheryl Sandberg, who was the COO maybe she still is the COO at Facebook. But she talks a lot about Lean In, and I even before, when I read that book, I thought, man, this is a lot of what I have done in my own personal life and what I subscribe to. Don't wait for somebody else to sing your praises for you. I think as sometimes women, we tend to put our nose to the grindstone and work really hard and think, well, our work will speak for itself. And it doesn't. And especially now in my role as a leader, and with direct reports and staff underneath me, and maybe Liz can talk more about hers because she has a whole lot more staff than I do. I don't see what everybody does every single day. I don't know if your nose is to the grindstone working away. I might not see that. I might not know that you come in after hours or on a Saturday, or you are really proud of this one project that you did. I might not know that. And so don't just wait and expect your managers or your supervisors or your boss to see what great things you're doing. Bring them up and talk about them often and be proud of them. And there's a line between being humble and braggadocious. I don't know if that's a word, but that's been something that I've always believed in. Speak up for yourself, and you'll go a lot farther.
Thank you, Sadie. I'm going to add braggadocious to my dictionary now. That was awesome. Liz, anything to add?
Yeah, I certainly would echo everything Sadie had to say. I think one of the biggest pieces of advice that I have for women going into a leadership role, and that I've shared with a lot of female identified staff that I've worked with over the years as they've kind of moved on into their own careers, there's kind of two things. One, there are going to be some things about you as a human being, and more specifically because you are a female identified human being, that are just going to rub some folks the wrong way because they might not come across as traditionally feminine. I remember when I was first starting out, one of the skills that I value most about myself now is my ability to think strategically and to navigate the politics of any workplace, because I will also tell you there are politics in any workplace. I don't care if it's McDonald's or the White House, you have politics. And when I was just starting out, my ability to kind of navigate those situations and to think about things that adapted a message to different audiences rubbed a lot of folks the wrong way because it came across as maybe a little manipulative, right? Or it maybe sounded like, well, you're just saying what this group wants to hear. And, how is that working as part of the team? And I think recognizing and understanding for yourself, these are the skills that I bring to the table and I have confidence in those skills, is really important. It's important to take the feedback, but feedback is for you to take in and consider. It's not for you to enact every single piece of that. And that's a huge part of, recognizing that your skills have value. The other thing I would say is find your authentic voice and embrace it. Your willingness and your comfort with doing that will grow as you grow in your profession, but don't shove yourself into what you believe a female leader should be. There's a lot of different ways that kind of manifests. I can tell you a story about me. So I run the Arc Fond du Lac. We're a nonprofit. We have folks on site for our day programs every day. I'm a fashion person. Like, I get a lot of enjoyment from fashion and style, both for myself and just kind of reading about it and following it. And, I am a 4-inch heels kind of girl, and I'm okay with that. And very, very early on in my tenure at the Arc, I was outside playing with some of the kids, and there were folks that were like, "How you can't do that in those shoes?" I'm like, "Oh yes, I can. This is not a problem. And if I can't, I'll take them off. We got this." So I think it's really just being comfortable with who you are and what's authentic to you and what makes you feel confident in doing your work. And to Sadie's point, I think with staff, absolutely. I don't see what everyone does every day. My job as a leader is not to be an expert in every single job that happens in our organization. I don't want to be. I don't have the time to be. My job as a leader is to put the right people in the right seats. Your job as the person, hopefully in the right seat, is to bring to my attention the things that you are doing above and beyond what I need for you to do, or the things that are moving us forward as an organization or moving yourself forward as a professional. At the end of the day, when you leave working for me, you're my resume. So how good you are at your job says a lot about me. But you have to show me and tell me what you're doing. Otherwise, I'm kind of focused on my stuff.
I love that answer in so many different ways. There were multiple points where I wanted to say something in relation to what you just said, but you kept bringing so many good points after. I love that the finding your voice and being you and being authentic. That's awesome. You also were starting to touch on this a little bit, so we'll jump into this next question. How do you motivate your employees? You had kind of talked about, with your employees, they're a reflection of you, right? How well they do is a reflection of you. But how do you motivate your employees in their day-to-day work and the tasks that they do?
I can go first. So I've had the opportunity to work with and supervise a lot of staff at a lot of different levels throughout my career, moving from higher ed into nonprofit. So I've worked with everyone from students to entry-level employees to grad students to folks with master's degrees to folks with a heck of a lot more experience than I have who work for me. Here's the deal. No one loves every part of their job. And to me, that's a really important thing to say to your staff. I don't expect you to love every single part of your job description. There's stuff about my job description that I don't like jump for joy over doing, but it has to get done. I really try to help staff find the pieces of their job that are so motivating to themselves that the things they don't love aren't a burden. Right? So that they can find that balance of, I know I need to do this thing, but by doing this thing, I get to do this other thing that I really, really enjoy. And that helps a lot. I think the other thing that, as I've moved into progressive leadership roles and now into an executive leadership role, it's not that I necessarily can do or will do every part of your job, but it is that willingness to step in or to recognize when someone is doing something that I can't do. I have a lot of staff who have skills and training that I don't have. There are things I truly cannot help with within our organization. And just being able to recognize, like, you have skills that you bring to the table that I don't, and I value that, I think really does help folks kind of make it through their day-to-day and some of those tougher moments. I will be the first to tell you I'm terrible at recognition. Like, it's not a strength at all. Anyone who's ever worked for me will tell you that recognition is like, I'm not a gold star person, trophy person. Like, I'm not good at that. But I do try to be really intentional about, when I see something, saying it in the moment. Because if my brain says, oh, go write them a card or send them an email, I won't do that. But, seeing something happening in the moment and just calling that out, I think is really powerful and motivates folks because it's more authentic in a lot of ways.
Good note. I will not be expecting a gold star after this, Liz.
I think you're doing a wonderful job right now. I just won't remember to tell you after.
Sadie?
Yeah, my personal philosophy is kind of non-traditional. I don't believe it's my role or any leader's role to be the motivator in the workplace. If I have to motivate you every day about your job, you probably are in the wrong job. That I hire motivated people. I work well with other motivated people. I'm a very motivated, gung-ho person. And so I kind of expect that out of people. And I agree with what Liz said. There's parts of your job that everybody doesn't like parts of their job. and it's kind of just comes with the territory. And so to acknowledge that and be okay with that. But I think also what I've learned in this really short period of time is explaining to your team how it affects them and what it means for them and what it means for the organization long term. If you're making changes, to have some level of transparency, so that your team knows you're doing this in the best interest of the company or the organization, and that it's going to move everybody forward. So having transparency, I think, is a motivator, because your team and your coworkers will soon learn that everything you do comes from a place of making your organization better and yourself better, and that's a motivator, knowing that you're there for the right reasons and to truly make a difference. That's a natural motivator.
Can I chime back in, Ben?
Yeah, absolutely.
I absolutely, I agree with Sadie. I just wanted to make a point because Sadie actually kind of alluded to this and then I forgot to talk about it. I have a significantly larger workforce under me than Sadie does. The ARC Fond du Lac has about 100 employees on our payroll. Nearly all of them are full-time. And we have the added challenge of very few of our employees actually work in the same building. They work very independently. They're in all of our different facilities that we have. And as a leader, as your workforce grows, your ability to find a one-size-fits-all approach to motivation becomes more challenging. So it's about finding managers that are good matches for the employees that you have. It's the other thing I would point out is in some industries, in some organizations, you will have employees who are there for the paycheck, and that is the only reason that they are there. That's okay. That's an acceptable reason to have a job. I think sometimes we lose sight of that. Like, it's okay to want to pay your bills. That doesn't necessarily look the same way in a workplace as someone who's like stoked to be there or stoked about what you're doing. So as a leader, you need to figure out a way to connect with those folks. Not necessarily you personally, right? But organizationally or company-wide, and figure out what that looks like. Is that how you onboard those folks in the story you tell about your organization so that maybe they can find a piece of something that they can be proud of, right? Or how do you empower your managers who directly supervise those folks to make sure that they're not a drain on your motivated employees, right? Because someone who comes in, they punch in, they punch out, they do what they need to do. They're meeting expectations, they're doing their job. But those are the same folks that are going to pull back or drain some of your employees that are like super excited about everything, because that's just a challenging dynamic to manage. So long story short, the bigger your workforce gets, the more challenging it is to motivate them, but it also all goes back to put the right people in the right seats, and it'll make your life as a leader a million times easier.
Very good point. That is absolutely phenomenal. 100 full-time employees. That is something else. Before we go to our next question, just a logistical Zoom thing. So if you're interested in just seeing the person who's talking on your screen, you can go to speaker view. If you want to see everyone as everyone talks, you can go to gallery view. It'll show everyone on your screen. And then additionally, don't forget, if you have questions, I saw one person was utilized in the chat. You can utilize the Q&A function in the chat, and we will make sure to ask those questions at some point in the program. But we just talked about kind of how to motivate your employees, but now let's talk about what motivates you. Who do you look up to for mentorship or inspiration? It could be a person, a podcast, something else. And this was also a question from an attendee on our program today.
Yeah, I can go first. I 100% believe in the value of mentorships, and I would urge everybody to actively seek out a mentor, and maybe not even one, but maybe a couple, or have a few people that you can look to professionally, because That's something I've always been really intentional about. And your friends are really important to feed kind of that day to day and for you to talk to. But you need to have a mentor and a professional group of people who push you to think bigger and better and longer term, that probably your friends maybe might not. And so I've had quite a few. Dave Anderson, who was actually one of my first bosses from Congressman Petrie's office, has still maintained his mentorship of me and assistance. Jim Spanbauer, the president of Mid-States Aluminum, has been a mentor to me. And also just having that professional network, honestly, is how I've gotten all of my jobs, including this one. It was a lot of who I knew and how I had networked. And was there a second part of that question? I kind of started babbling and forgot.
No, you were right on it. Who do you look up for mentorship or inspiration? And then it could be a person, podcast, other. So no, you're right on it. Keep going. If
Okay.
you're, yeah.
I do. I also love podcasts. I'm a big EntreLeadership podcast fan. So that is Dave Ramsey's network, and they do a weekly podcast, and it's all about small business and entrepreneurs and running a business and how you become a better leader. And then there's some other podcasts that I really like. One of them is called The Manager Tools, and it's a really old podcast, but really kind of valuable for day-to-day managing. And then just kind of sprinkled in other podcasts as I hear from them. I love true crime podcasts, but that doesn't help make me a better leader.
You never know. You never know.
Maybe a
Liz?
better detective at your murdering mystery.
Maybe a better Liz, who do you look up to for mentorship or inspiration?
Sure. I think my approach has maybe been a little bit different, just given the path I took to where I am now, coming up through higher ed and specifically student housing. It's a really formulaic kind of career path, and you certainly can diverge from it. I followed it pretty traditionally, grad school, entry-level job, mid-level job, senior level job, and really kind of built a network very much insular to that industry and that profession. It's not to say I haven't had mentors, but I think, moving around every 2 to 3 years kind of created some challenges, but it also built a really broad, diverse network of colleagues and professionals. I agree with Sadie, mentorship is really important, but you also need to figure out if mentorship is something that works for you. So having kind of a formal mentor relationship isn't anything that I've ever pursued in a traditional manner, but I certainly have folks that I have remained in contact with and that I really consider valuable resources for me professionally, either from school, from places that I've worked. I'm still incredibly close with my former director from UW Oshkosh, Tom Foydick, who actually runs the Oshkosh Food Pantry now. So he left a year before I did, and now we both run nonprofits. So now we're nonprofit friends, and he has really moved into sort of this like executive director counterpart that I can go to in an entirely different way, and it's fun to see those relationships kind of change. I don't listen to podcasts. My commute's about 3 minutes. It's really not long enough for a podcast. But I did take notes. I had like a whole list of things. So I took notes on Sadie's podcast in case I find time to listen to those. In terms of inspiration, one of the things that I have always done and I continue to do now is to look outside of my field and outside of my industry. And that's really where I've found a lot of inspiration and a lot of motivation to pursue new ideas or to just think about things differently. When I was working in higher ed, I did a lot of customer service and frontline service work because I worked with families and students in terms of where they lived. I spent a lot of time reading about customer service from the Disney perspective, from hotel perspectives, from rental car company perspectives. And there were some really great management pieces that I was able to take from looking outside of my own industry. And some of it's little stuff, right? Like, what decisions can you empower frontline employees to make? There's a lot of those things. And ultimately for you from a leadership seat, there are things that don't matter. There are things that you don't care about. But to that employee, you've given them some autonomy and some ownership and said, I trust you. You can make this decision. And that's really been hugely helpful for me. I would also echo what Sadie said. Your professional network matters so much. It's so important. But when you get into kind of this executive leadership role, that network has to start to look different, because you really can't have those relationships inside of your organization anymore. So it's, finding your counterparts. It's building those relationships that you can still have that sounding board outside of your organization.
I love the two different contrasts of your perspectives, and how, you're both obviously great leaders of our community and your organizations. And it's okay to have two different perspectives on mentorship and inspiration. That's really cool. We're going to shift a little bit. We're going to pivot. Sorry, had to. 2020 has presented many hurdles. What has been the biggest one to overcome? This was also submitted from one of our panelists before as they registered.
I can go first.
Liz, you have a lot more pivoting and pandemic-y things than I have.
So this answer might surprise you then. I think the biggest hurdle that, as I reflect back on 2020, and the thing that I think I've come back to time and again, and let's be honest, the past 9 months, has been not letting 2020 become a hurdle, not letting it become the crutch or the reason that we fall back on, or the justification for why we're doing the things that we're doing. We've made incredible strides as an organization this year. We have done incredible things. We've launched new programs. We've brought on new staff. We've refocused on the things that we believe matter most to the folks that we serve, as well as to our community. And the conversation around all of those things from my perspective, and how I've framed those for my staff, has been about these being sustainable changes for the organization. We're not launching a bigger, bolder, healthy lifestyles program because of COVID. We're doing it because it matters. So how is it structured now? But how do you move that forward? And if that structure evolves, awesome. That's what should happen. I'm not asking you to reinvent the wheel, but I sure as heck don't want you to, continue doing things virtually when we can have 400 people in a room. Like, we need to be able to do that. So I think the biggest hurdle has not been letting COVID become the reason why we're acting. It's a much more psychological hurdle, but I think from an organizational perspective and a leadership perspective, that's been huge for us, because it is what it is. I actually had a staff member yesterday who looked at me and said, this is basically our flu now. This is just how we exist, and this is what we do. And we're going to figure out how to make this all work and still do new things. And I think that's really important, and really shows how my staff has latched on to, this is what it is. This isn't why we're doing it. We're doing things for reasons that will continue beyond a pandemic. That being said, yes, like from a business perspective, it's been difficult. I think the biggest thing, as I look back, so my background in higher ed is business operations. So it's a lot of finance, budgeting, those kinds of pieces. If you are someone who wants a leadership role, or if you're in one right now, if that's the goal, for the love, please understand budgeting. Please, please, please start to learn now. Because that's, I think, businesses and organizations that have come through this year with less pain and less challenges are those that have strong leadership that understands even if it's on a basic level, how their budget works and how their organization or their company is financed. It's so important. Know what a cash flow is. Know why you could have a budget that says we're going to lose money, but you have more cash at the end of the year. If you can understand how those two things can exist simultaneously, you are well on your way. But that would certainly be kind of the piece that I think, just looking back, if that's not something you have, start building that skill now, because as you move into those leadership roles, that becomes so important.
That was a phenomenal answer.
Thank
don't
you.
even know what to say. That's a really good answer.
I've had about a pot of coffee this morning, so I feel like that probably helped.
Awesome. Sadie, what has been the biggest hurdle to overcome? I know you talked about the task force already and kind of being thrown into the fire day one. Is there anything else you want to share?
Sure. I also love Liz's answer, and totally agree with being able to read a P&L and a balance sheet and a cash flow statement, and keep that in mind, because I know I finally figured out how to see who else was on this call. I know some people on here are also involved in nonprofits. And so when you serve on a board of directors or you start volunteering for maybe a nonprofit organization, that's also important too, is to be able to read those financial statements for a board that you're serving on, so that you're making good decisions as a board member, as a volunteer, and actually understanding what kind of situation that organization is sitting in. And I have not found a good word yet about COVID. That part of COVID has been a blessing for us at Envision. We never closed our doors. Same with Liz at the Arc of Fond du Lac, never closed our doors. We continued to work for our members. We're a business member organization. We're the Chamber of Commerce and Economic Development organization for the whole county. And just as businesses continued to operate throughout the pandemic, so did we. We had to change with how we connected and brought value and checked in. But this was our opportunity to shine. This was our opportunity to show our members this is why we're here and why it's important to either be a member, maintain a membership, or become a member of Envision Greater Fond du Lac. And I 100% believe that we have showed our value to the community and Wisconsin as a whole. We're involved also regionally, similar to Liz's organization that has a national component. We are really involved regionally with like New North and with the WEDC, with the state. And so we have certainly changed, but same with what Liz said, we still are doing what makes sense for the organization, even in spite of COVID, and we're not using COVID as an excuse. And I know a lot of other places had to cancel or change things because of COVID, but a lot of us have continued to operate in spite of and flourish.
Thank you, Sadie. And yes, I think it is quite phenomenal that both your organizations, were able to keep doors open and operations running during the shutdown, during the pandemic. I mean, that's a big feat. We do have a question from the audience. Have you ever, sorry, the chat just changed as I started reading. Have you ever been in a professional situation in which you felt your growth was being hindered or somebody did not have the best intentions toward you? If so, how did you handle that situation?
I have one. So yeah, I have. I think the way the question is phrased, it's really interesting to me. So there's that you felt your growth was being hindered, right? Or that someone didn't have the best of intentions toward you. And those may ultimately be two different things, right? I think in any situation where you feel like your growth is being hindered, you have to have that conversation with either the person that you feel is doing that or with a supervisor if those are different folks, right? Or if they're the same. I had when I was working in student housing at UW Oshkosh, obviously my director retired. They brought someone new in. We had an interim person, and then we had a new person, and it was a whole thing. And what's interesting about it, and why I bring this up, is I was a solid, oh gosh, at least 12 years younger than my immediate counterparts at the associate director level in my department. So they had all been there for a really long time. I'd been there for 2 years. I was significantly younger, but I was working at their same level. And I ended up having a conversation very directly, and I will tell you, it took a lot of courage. It was a very scary conversation to have, but I had a very direct conversation with the person that had come in to take on the director role, and said, look, like, this is what I'm doing. These are the issues that I'm having. I don't understand, like, where are my growth opportunities? Like, I've demonstrated not only that I can be successful in my role, but well beyond that, but you're giving opportunities to other folks. Help me understand why, right? And there was some clarity that came from that conversation, but there also some clarity in terms of understanding their thought process, but also clarity that my growth in that role in that department was limited. And sometimes that's the outcome, is that your growth is structurally limited, right? It is not that your supervisor doesn't want to give you more. They may not be able to, right? If you're in a really formulaic environment where position descriptions really, really matter, a supervisor may feel like, I can't let you do more because then you're infringing upon someone else's work. Or in some cases, and I've had this conversation with staff, I can't morally or ethically ask you to do more because I can't compensate you for doing it. I can get super creative with different forms of compensation. Like, I might not be able to put more dollars in your paycheck, but there might be flexibilities or other benefits that I can give you. But at the end of the day, I, as a leader, can't stomach or live with having someone do so much beyond their position description or work at such a substantially higher level without compensating it. That's a really hard place to be as a supervisor. It's also a hard place to be as an employee. And I think the other piece is, you have to have the conversation. If you don't talk to the person you feel is hindering you, or the person that you feel might not have good intentions toward the work that you're doing, you're just relying on your assumptions, and that's going to be problematic. You have to ask the questions and have the conversation, but you also have to be prepared that the answer is your growth is hindered. There's nowhere to go. Your option for growth is to go. That's okay. I think most employers don't want their employees to stay forever, certainly not in the job that we hired you in, right? If we have career progression options within the organization, amazing. If we don't, and you're great, like, we know you have to go. And at some point you're going to know you have to go. And I think for you to be able to be self-aware enough to say, I had this conversation. I understand and respect what you can do for me here and what can change, but I also know that there's some things that can't, and that means I need to move on. That says a lot about you as an employee too.
Thank you, Liz.
I have nothing to add. That was
I could tell by your face that was I don't have anything to add.
I have nothing of value to add.
Perfect. So next question, we talked about kind of 2020 hurdles, but what would you say is the biggest challenge in your current role? So not necessarily 2020, just what is the biggest challenge of being the executive director of the ARC Fond du Lac, or president and CEO of Envision Greater Fond du Lac?
Mine, for me right now, is I'm just so new that introducing myself and getting out into the community. Luckily I had a lot of network in Fond du Lac County already. One of the reasons that I got this job was because of my professional network. But just getting out there, and then also just Envision Greater Fond du Lac, still a lot of people don't know who we are, what we do, that we're a 4-year-old, almost 3.5, 4-year-old organization that was the merger of 2 really long-standing organizations that people knew about. So it's still educating the public on who we are and what we do is a major hurdle so that people utilize us more.
My apologies, I was not muted. When you said you're 3.5, 4 years old, I turned to Bree and said, just a little toddler. Liz, anything to add?
Yeah, I think it's, I would certainly echo Sadie's point about introducing and getting engaged in the community. I had mentioned, like, I've lived in Fond du Lac for 6 years. I've only worked in Fond du Lac for like 1.5 years. I did not have a network here. My network was north in Oshkosh. And I really had to, and continue to, really focus on building that network here and getting out and getting engaged in the community. And I think it's really, that's been a really big challenge in a good way. It's something that needs to happen for me as well as for the organization, but it certainly is a commitment, a very valuable one, but a commitment nonetheless. This is kind of the more technical answer. One of the biggest challenges in my current role is really putting some new systems in place at the ARC, and getting us to a place where we're able to really focus on, we've been here for 57 years. How do we make it to 75? How do we make it to 100? Because we serve more than 800 individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities every year. And that doesn't include their family members. That doesn't include all the folks in the community that we engage with and interact with in other ways. So we're really working on doing some super sexy things like building master plans and repair and replacement schedules and life cycles for technology. Like, the things you go into an executive director role to do, those are the things that we're doing. And they're a challenge because it's a different way of thinking for us as an organization. It's a far more future focused approach. And that's definitely something that is taking a fair amount of our time, in addition to, running a business day to day. But I'm also kind of a facilities nerd, so I actually really enjoy repair and replacement schedules. So it's been fun.
Yeah, to some people, those are sexy things. So. All right. This one is one that I think about a lot. What have you learned working in your current position that you did not learn in school?
Everything. My undergrad was the biggest waste of time, but a great 4 years of partying.
The student housing professional in me cringed just a tiny bit at that.
I would say probably the supply and demand charts in my econ classes have stuck with me, but no, my master's program definitely prepared me more for my professional career than my undergrad did. Nobody prepares you for office politics or how to navigate or how to handle conflict or how to read a P&L sheet or a balance or a cash flow. So yeah, Liz, I know I'm sorry, coming from higher ed, that's absolutely not what you want to hear.
It's actually very healthy, and the fact that you acknowledge it is really important. And I would also be remiss if I did not tell you that I had a really great first year of undergrad, and then I scaled it way back so that I graduated. Which is true, very true. My GPA my first year was probably lower than my blood alcohol content, in all honesty. I, however, did learn a ton from my undergrad that applies to my current work and my master's program too. My undergrad degree is in communication. I could go on and on, but I will tell you what I have taken from that all the way through has been the ability to write. Please don't ever underestimate how important it is to be able to communicate your ideas in actual written word. And it also was really, really valuable in understanding how to craft and adapt messages and asks to different audiences. That's some of the strategic thinking that I kind of mentioned earlier. You can ask for the same thing from different groups. You just ask for it in different ways. You have to figure out what's going to motivate folks. My master's program did actually include a course on how to read a P&L. I might have cried that day. It was also on a Friday night. I just want to point out it was on a Friday night in a windowless room. It was really unfair in a lot of ways. What none of that prepares you for, though, is the reality of being the leader of an organization and how hard that can be and how emotional that can be. And how to handle some of those feelings. Like there is not a class on what to do when you want to scream at the top of your lungs about things that are happening. There is not a class about how you handle never getting to inbox zero if you're one of those people. There's not a class in prioritizing. Right? Like I can tell you, like, sure, you should prioritize based on the things that are, most urgent, most important, the things that impact other people. But there are only 24 hours in a day, and not all of those are workable hours. So there's nothing that prepares you for having to say, I said this thing was important and now it's not important anymore. It's not important today. And that's been a huge lesson of this past year. Is there are days where it is all COVID all the time, because that's what's most important. It doesn't matter what else was scheduled. That's what's most important. And I think that's something that nothing prepares you for how to make those decisions and how to be at peace with those decisions. You just have to kind of figure that out as you go.
Well, I'm glad we're all being honest about our college experiences, and I'm glad they were so similar. But in all seriousness, I also agree with that. Just with my education and some of the things, even like I got a political science degree, and I worked for a U.S. Senate campaign after I graduated immediately, and it was vastly different from what I learned. Our next question also comes from the chat, the audience participation. Can each champion share what they would most like to see for the future of our community? This can be in the immediate or the long term.
Sure. I have a lot of big dreams for Fond du Lac County. The first one is this Lakeside Park project. Envision Greater Fond du Lac is really passionate about it. We have publicly supported it. Our board of directors publicly supports it. The reason we support it is more than where a restaurant is going to go or an amphitheater is going to be in the park. It's what does Fond du Lac want to look like in 5, 10, 20 years? And for those who are younger on this call and maybe don't know, and to be fair, I wasn't born then either, but this all happened in 1980 and 81. And honestly, it's the same cycle that is happening that happened in 1980 and 1981. And in the early 80s, that's when this ended in a referendum that stopped any development in Lakeside Park. And here we are in 2020 and having these same conversations that is 40 years later. And Fond du Lac needs to move forward. And what that means is we need to be open to change, open to doing things differently, being more inclusive, equitable, respectful of different points of view, of different opinions. And it's okay that you're not from Fond du Lac. It's okay that if you just move here and you have an opinion on what the city should be or look like, your opinion is just as valid as somebody else's. And someone on city council, it isn't Ben, but a comment that somebody from city council had made to me was essentially like the audacity of some people who think that because they either lived here longer or grew up here, that their opinion counts for more than somebody else's, or maybe their vote should count twice as opposed to somebody else's, is just really unfair. That everybody has an opinion, and just because you just moved here, you might want to move Fond du Lac forward just as much as somebody who has had 6 generations here. So I did get a little bit on my soapbox there, but that is our number one goal right now, because we see that as one very small piece in a lot of other pieces to better the future of Fond du Lac, attract more young people. Our statistics of our aging workforce should scare everybody in this county, and we need to attract young people to take those jobs and become those next leaders.
Sadie got on her soapbox, so I didn't have to today. So perfect.
You're welcome.
Liz, what is your what does the future of the community look like for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think when you choose to lead a nonprofit, you have to be able to identify and share some of the mission, right? It has to also be something that matters to you. And one of the things that I really wanted and that I was looking for when I took the opportunity to lead the ARC was to be able to become fully involved and engaged in the community. It's something I'd wanted for a really long time. I just needed the right opportunity for that to happen. I'm actually going to echo a lot of the things Sadie said, but for somewhat different, or at least more narrowly focused reasons. I think we are on this incredible path toward becoming an inclusive and accessible community for every member of our community. And it's happening in a lot of different ways. It's obviously, I see it in the work that we do in the collaborations that the ARC has. It's having cooking classes at Annie's. It's she's on the call, but Aubrey, who works for me, just launched a new inclusive fitness program with a new gym kind of out by Urban Fuel. It's seeing our community start to have these conversations, being open to these conversations, and then making things happen. And it sets us apart not only from other communities our size, but from significantly larger communities. Our chapter here of the ARC is actually one of the 15 largest in the nation. So my counterparts, like my counter executive directors, they're in Philadelphia, they're in New York City, they're in LA. Like, these are the folks that I look to within my organization on a national level to talk about things with, and they are consistently amazed that a community our size is doing so much, and they are taking our ideas. Sensory Santa is a great example. I have a colleague in Chicago who is like, this is a great idea, and literally no one has thought about this here. So we have such amazing things happening that I think we can really continue that. And I think we have people that are passionate and people that are in the right positions to start having those conversations and broadening that out and making it, something that defines our community. I absolutely agree. We have to be able to not only recruit, but we have to retain the folks that come here for work, that come here to live. And that means new amenities. That means growing and changing as a community. That's why things like the Lakeside Park project are so important. For us as an organization, we can only serve the folks that are here, right? So our ability to bring more folks into the community allows us as a nonprofit to serve more people. And we know that we have great services, and we know that there's a lack of services in so many areas. So if there's a way that kind of symbiotically, the community is great, we have great services, those should all work together to bring folks in and keep folks here, particularly if we continue to grow and change. I really want to see us get more engaged and just have more dialogue as a community. I think we're taking some steps in the right direction. You know, societally and culturally, that's hard to do. It's really hard to say, this is my opinion. You don't share that opinion, but I respect your opinion, and let's have a dialogue about it, right? And it's that shift too from debate to dialogue that I think we're trying to make as a community, and I think we can. It's going to take some time, but I think it also takes voices that are willing to kind of make that push, much like Sadie said, that, you know, we should be able to, you know, respect folks' opinions and recognize that all voices in our community have value, just like the folks that I serve. You know, if they have perspectives, and they certainly do, about services and improvements and things happening in the community, I want their voice to be valued just as much as, you know, mine as a relatively new Fond du Lac resident versus someone who's lived here their entire life.
Sounds like you two both have your city council campaign platforms ready to go. So I will bring over the nomination forms after this, and we will proceed. What has been your favorite positive thing of this year?
Being a champion at Breakfast with Champions, obviously.
Good
and
answer.
getting to share that with Sadie.
Exactly. Getting to share it with another female leader in the community.
Awesome. We only have a few questions left here. This is a big one that I think gets asked every year, and I love to hear different perspectives and answers to this one. How do you maintain a healthy work-life balance? I know that's, you know, for some of us, that there's no balance and it's all like this, but for others, I think it's very important to be able to balance, especially, you know, as you're moving through different phases of life. I'm going to stop talking now and let you guys answer, though.
I have I have some feelings about this question, and one of them, because I wonder, would you be asking two men the same question at this conversation, or is it because we're women that the question is asking us, how do we balance a professional life and a career?
There's still going to be wildly different answers, though, because we are at very different places.
I also didn't write these questions. I'm sorry.
No, and I know, and I'm not trying to make anybody feel bad for asking that question, but you know, it is a question. I have worked mainly with men in my career in federal government and political campaigns, tends to be old white men, and so I can guarantee that when Congressman Petri or Congressman Grothman were in rooms, they were never asked about their work-life balance. And so I just always like to be kind of cognizant of that, to be fair to professional women as to professional men, because they kind of have the same thing. They have families too. So sorry, I feel like I got on a soapbox again. But I've been really blessed with supportive friends and family to help me with my career. And I have tended to put my career first. I am married to a man, and I do have two young children. And I have tended to put my career, maybe not first, but to take it very seriously. I take it just as seriously as I take raising my two kids. Yeah, so it's different for everybody. I feel like I can't answer that because literally every single person's life is different. What works for me is not going to work for Ben or for Liz. So that's my answer.
Do you want to add anything, Liz? I just know that, like, right now in my life, I wake up in the morning and it's pretty much go, whether it's, you know, my day job, city council, my side hustle. And I don't have balance, but I also don't have a family. So that's the thing, because I know someday I'm going to have to sacrifice some things, and I am going to have to figure out how to balance trying to have a family, with kids, and because those are things that I want too.
So I do have thoughts. I also have strong feelings about this question. So let me lead with this. I am also married. My husband also works. We don't have any children. And I will tell you that that brings a whole different host of challenges when it comes to work and life for me as a woman leader without children. Okay. Opposite to Sadie, I have always worked predominantly with women and predominantly women with children. And that is true now. So being a woman, a married woman without children, I have had to be very clear and very direct that my time is not less valuable because I do not have children. I have had to be very clear that my family life, admittedly smaller, right, because it's my husband and I, is not less valuable because we don't have children. That comes up routinely. It's often done without much thought, right? I really haven't seen it in the same way as I did in higher ed, where there was a lot of night and weekend events, and I didn't have kids, so clearly Liz could work the late night program. I don't want to be at anything that goes past 10 o'clock. I certainly don't want to be at something that starts at 10 o'clock. So there was a lot of opportunity for me to say, like, no, like, this doesn't default to me because I don't tick these certain boxes. I would also say throw out the idea of work-life balance. If you are striving for balance, you are going to fail. You are going to make yourself miserable in the process. It's still cliche, but work-life integration is really what you're looking for, because there are times when your career needs more. There's time when your family life needs more. And both of those things have to be okay with not always being the most important. You have to decide where your time and your energy needs to be, because you can't be 100% with your family. You can't be 100% at your job at the same time. It's just not possible, particularly as we all continue to exist through a pandemic. I would also say, from like a balance perspective or an integration perspective, a work and life perspective, value your time. We undervalue our time, particularly as women. We undervalue our time. And when you are a female leader, your time is valuable. Don't be afraid to make decisions that are traditionally masculine. I have a housekeeper. She comes twice a week because I don't have time. My time is not worth cleaning my house. My time is not worth doing my laundry. That is an odd thing to hear a female executive say, and I get that. But I also know that when my husband said it in a presentation that he gave, no one batted an eye, because, well, of course, that makes sense. Like, of course he's not doing those things. Was their assumption that I was doing them? I don't know. But I just want to dispel that right now. Like, you can make decisions that allow you to have the time to do your job, to do your life, even if those might be considered unpopular. And that's okay. That's okay. It's not a bad thing. It's just something you have to be comfortable with. And I'm going to say it again because it's so important. Throw out the idea of balance. You're not going to find it. You're not. It's just not there. I pour a lot of myself into my work, but my work and my personal life intersect in a lot of ways, and I'm happy with that. That's what I wanted. That doesn't work for everyone. Mm-hmm. So yeah, and please ask male leaders this question too. It's very important.
I'll be sure to ask the two male champions tomorrow as well.
Feel free to say that we suggested they be asked this question.
Two final questions. This one can be kind of quick. Book recommendations. Any good books? I know Sadie said Lean In was a good one. Any other good books that we should be reading?
Oh my God, I'm a huge book reader. I was actually just looking at my stack over there. I love Stephen Covey and Michael Watkins. The First 90 Days is a great one. The Leadership Compass. I also do like Dave Ramsey and Susie Orman's books on like Total Money Makeover, how to invest. I think that is really important to learn how and what your benefits mean at work. If your employer matches your 401k, that's free money you should be taking. I also like to read fiction as well, but I won't say any of those.
Could you just like give us one fiction book?
Well, I mean, J.K. Rowling, of course. J.R. Tolkien.
That's a hefty read.
I know. Lord of the Rings is not for the faint of hearted.
Or those with not much time on their hands. I would add some of my favorites. The First 90 Days, I think, is a great book if you are starting a new role or even transitioning roles, or you just want to kind of restart your thinking. The First 90 Days is a great option. Good to Great is another wonderful option. If you are involved with a nonprofit, the Nonprofit Board Handbook is super, super helpful as a resource. And then my personal favorite that I refer to or offer to everyone is Radical Candor. So it's actually written by a female leader. So she worked in IT out in California with like Google and Apple and did a lot of training and management there. And it's just a really great, it's great for anyone. I just particularly like that it's from a female perspective or written by a female. It talks a lot about how you engage with your employees and what you owe to them and how to be direct and authentic in that. It also gave birth to my favorite reminder for folks and organizations is that organizations need rock stars and shooting stars. So you need people who are steady, who don't want to move on to the next biggest thing, but you also need folks that do want that. And it's that balance of those two types of employees that's going to let you achieve amazing things under your leadership. So highly, highly, highly recommend Radical Candor.
That is a really good one. I also wonder if Good to Great will do any kind of part 2 because of Wells Fargo was such a was like their number one. It was their number one. Or maybe they would say that Wells Fargo will still stand the test of time, and despite what happened, they'll but Good to Great is a really good book as well.
So we are not only blessed to have two amazing champions here in the call with us, but you two are also young professionals in our community. What is your advice you would give to other aspiring young professionals who want to be you someday, who want to be on the champion scene? What would be your advice to them in terms of their career and, you know, how you got to where you are?
I can go first. I am really intentional about my career and what I do. So what maybe sound weird to some other people or kind of silly. I've had a journal for a year. I've tracked goals. Every year I have a vision for my year, and I have long-term goals. And honestly, becoming a CEO was one of my goals, and also becoming a champion of Breakfast with Champions was one of my goals. And so 2020 has been a pretty awesome year for me professionally for that reason. So I'm really intentional about writing things down and then reading the books and reading the newspaper and watching industry trends and being knowledgeable and making new connections that could help me someday. That part of my monthly goals here are making 5 new connections in different industries that wouldn't be typical. You know, in Fond du Lac, in Fond du Lac County, I've got kind of my typical, you know, meet the people at Mercury Marine and Grande. But I've expanded that to, you know, like Oshkosh Corporation or Marinette Marine up north. So being really intentional about growth, writing things down, having measurable goals. And also I'm a big believer in gratitude. I'm a disgustingly optimistic person most of the time. So I also make sure to write down every day things that I'm grateful for. And sometimes it's as simple as a really good cup of coffee, and other times it's being able to call a good friend when I've had the day from hell. So.
Love it. Double check there, Sadie.
All the good things, Sadie. I think I would echo everything Sadie said in terms of like goals and kind of knowing what you're working for and keeping track of those things. I think it's really important. On kind of the more intangible side for me, don't get hung up on a title or an industry or a company. Nonprofit wasn't this wasn't what I anticipated. I started college thinking I was going to be a pharmacist, and I failed organic chemistry and got asked to leave calculus. So that required a little bit of a shift. It was misguided from the outset, so it's fine. Don't let changing industry scare you. Know what you want to do and look for that. Like if you're looking for a new job, don't get hung up on a title. Look at what the job is actually doing and pursue that. That's how you're going to move forward, because that's how you're going to stay motivated, right? That's how you're going to make it through the hard days. That's how you're going to make it through the 2020s. So pursue what you want to do. Invest in relationships with people. You need to understand how folks work in organizations, how folks work in communities, and you need to develop kind of that awareness of how do you work with all sorts of different types of people as you, right? Not how you become those sorts of people, but how does that kind of all filter in and become part of who you are and how you lead? Because what works for me doesn't necessarily work for Sadie. I'm not undyingly optimistic. I am somewhere between pessimistic and realistic. And I can still work with people like Sadie. I just have to adapt and amend and not let the pessimism come out quite as much. And I think it's really about getting to know how you can lead folks to where they want to go, and don't let fear get in your way. If you can start working now on accepting that you're going to make mistakes and getting really comfortable with the words, I made a mistake, I messed it up, here's how I'm going to fix it, you're going to go really far. I mess stuff up all the time. Ask my staff. I am the first to say, nope, that was my bad. I screwed that up. I forgot to do that. I did it wrong. Get really, really comfortable with that and owning it, and you're going to be fine. Most of our mistakes are fixable, and sometimes they're not. They all have consequences. Sometimes they're more significant than others. But if you can accept that you will make mistakes, you'll go far.
Thank you, Liz. I on behalf of the community, and I'm sure the Arc Fond du Lac feels the same way, we're all glad that you chose to not be a pharmacist and that you failed chemistry. So,
I personally think that being asked to leave calculus is the better part of that story, but thank you.
This finishes up the day one of Breakfast with Champions. Thank you, Sadie Parafiniuk and Liz Morrell. Virtual round of applause. Obviously, our attendees are not on camera, so you can't. They're all right now. They're all clapping really hard right now. You all did a great job. It's awesome to hear your insight and your wisdom. It was great to be able to ask you a few questions. We are going to, if anyone is interested in Sadie or Liz's info after, you can put it in the chat and we can pass that on to you if you have follow-up questions for them. But we appreciate you all logging on, and we appreciate Liz and Sadie taking the time out of their busy day to log on as well. Tomorrow we have another session. It is with JJ Raflick, the CEO of the Fond du Lac YMCA, and Rick Froh, the Chief Operations Officer at Grande Cheese. Sure to be a good one, just like today. So if you're interested, you can sign up until 5 p.m. tomorrow. 5 p.m. tonight for the tomorrow session. 5 p.m. tonight for the tomorrow session. You can log on. It is not at 8 o'clock though. It is 9:30 tomorrow, 9:30 to 11. So it's a little different timing. We tried to stagger some of the times so people could go to different sessions if they'd like. And Liz and Sadie, thank you so much. We actually had someone say standing ovation. So you actually had a standing ovation for this one. We appreciate your time this morning, and we will see you around the community.
Thank you.